Thank you. Aloha. I've been meeting a lot of people over the last couple of days who visit Hawaii often, so I'm feeling the aloha spirit here alive and well. Thank you all so much for being here, and I'm really grateful for the invitation to join all of you. I want to talk to you about freedom, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. All of these words are words that are synonymous with America, what it means to be an American. These are not Democrat words or Republican words. These principles are ones that belong to all of us, and they are the foundational bricks that our country was built upon. But unfortunately, we're facing a barrage of attacks on these freedoms, on these principles, by those who are in positions of power, who care more for their power or themselves than they do for the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the American people. So what are they doing? What is their approach in this race for more power? It's to divide and conquer, to weaken the populace, to make us more dependent on government so that they have more control, to censor us, to silence us, to disarm us, to pit us one against the other, using identity politics and fomenting fear and hatred between us. So unfortunately, we are terribly divided. I saw a quote earlier today that I wanted to share with you because Patrick Henry warned us of exactly where this path leads. In 1799, he said, "Let us trust in God and our better judgment to set us right hereafter. United we stand, divided we fall. Let us not split into factions which must destroy that union upon which our existence hangs." Now, it's easy to point fingers, and a lot of people do it. It's easy to say, you know what, it's their fault. It's the other guys. But really, we have to go deeper to find the solution. And the reality is that we are facing a spiritual crisis in this country. You know, the tribalism that is tearing us apart is really an indication of the erosion of a spiritual foundation. A lack of a recognition that we are one nation under God, that we are all God's children, and knowing that inspires among us a respect and care for each other. Now in Hawaii, we call this aloha. Aloha is not just a word that we greet each other with. It doesn't mean hello or goodbye. There's a deeper, more powerful meaning, which really is a recognition that we are all connected, that we are all God's children, and that we come to each other and greet each other with aloha with this sincere, heartfelt respect and love, no matter the color of our skin or where we come from or who we voted for or how we worship or any of these other things. It gets to who we really are. And it is this spirit that we find at the heart of our Declaration of Independence and in our Constitution, where we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Our founders recognized that our freedom comes from God, nobody else. And to recognize and respect each other as children of God is to appreciate that we belong to God and no one else. So no one else has the right to take away these intrinsic freedoms that God has given us. Now, just a few days ago, we observed Memorial Day. It's a somber day for many of us, those of us who've lost brothers and sisters in war, those who paid the ultimate price. And so it's a tough day, but it's also a time to reflect. It's a time to celebrate our freedoms. It's a time to celebrate that which they sacrificed for. All of us gathered here, Americans across the country, we all stand on the shoulders of great Americans, some of whom I've had the privilege of serving alongside, who sacrificed everything for our freedom. This is why it makes me so angry to hear politicians, to hear people in power, including our own president, speak so flippantly and easily about dismissing these freedoms. Just the other day, in a debate in Congress about the Second Amendment, I heard one of my Democratic colleagues say, "Spare me the BS about constitutional rights." So while they give flowery speeches on Memorial Day, and they send out tweets that say thank you to our troops for their sacrifice, we see through their actions how they really feel, how these words mean nothing. They disdain and reject our Constitution. They dishonor and spit on the graves of those who sacrificed all. Those who sacrificed for our Constitution, our Bill of Rights. Those who sacrificed for our First Amendment that says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of people to peaceably assemble and petition the government for redress of grievances. This right to free speech is a right to free speech, whether we like that speech or not. It's a right to the free press. It's a right to protest. And it's a freedom to worship in the way that we choose or not at all. Our Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, lately you'll hear some people talking about this and saying, well, you know, this is fine if it's just about hunting. But they're denying our right and our freedom to defend ourselves and to defend our families and those we love. Now, over these past weeks, our nation has seen great tragedy. And we all join the loved ones in mourning the loss of those who were killed by criminals in these mass shootings, as well as those who are killed on our streets in America every day, but whose names don't make it into headlines or on the news. There are too many, and we as a country need to come together to see what we need to do and what we can do to prevent these tragedies. The truth that is getting lost in so much of the noise around that surrounds us is that getting rid of the Second Amendment will not stop these evil acts of violence. We've been gun owners in this country since its inception, so we need to recognize there are deeper problems that we need to address. Similarly, getting rid of the First Amendment, banning and censoring so-called hate speech, as many of our politicians are advocating for now, will not get rid of hate. But it's in these situations that we understand why the Constitution and Bill of Rights is so important. Why our founders recognized that absolute power corrupts absolutely. They understood that the temptation of those in powers to abuse their power needed to be checked. So they crafted the Constitution, Bill of Rights to make it crystal clear that this balance of power must reside in the hands of the people, not the government. So when we talk about these powers that we have, the power of the pen and the power of a free press, this is essential to a free society. Talk about the power that we have of free speech, where a child can stand up and say, hey, guess what? The emperor has no clothes on. The power of the people's voices to gather peaceably, to assemble, to protest our government when it's not acting in the interests of the people. But the most empowering of all rights is our freedom to choose to develop a personal relationship with God, the all-powerful, all-loving, all-empowering, supreme, the place where we find true love, where we find that spiritual strength that gives us courage, where we find that willingness to sacrifice for others, and the clarity to recognize the difference between what's right and wrong. So when we have people in positions of power today who are trying actively to take away our God-given rights that are enshrined in the Constitution, what we're seeing is a rejection of God and the Constitution in their efforts to try to take our power away. Because the weaker we are, the more powerful they become. The more powerful we are, the weaker they become. So that's why they want us to be weak, to be dependent, to be afraid, and they threaten us that we must comply or face the full force of the federal government, turning institutions that literally exist to serve the people against us. So whether it's the IRS going after organizations with the word patriot in their name, or the Department of Justice going after fellow Americans who dare to hold anti-authority views, or President Biden and his administration's most recent effort to create a Ministry of Truth disinformation board, dictating to us what is true and what is not, and working hand in hand with big tech to silence those who don't blindly follow along. They're doing exactly what our founders rejected. They believe that they are the kings and we are the subjects. But the Declaration of Independence clearly says, to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. And that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter, to abolish it, and to institute new government. So, yes, our freedoms are being threatened, but that threat is not coming from some far-off foreign country. It's coming from within, and it's coming from people who took an oath of office, like I did, both as a soldier and a member of Congress, to support and defend our Constitution. They are acting as domestic enemies of the people and our country because they are seeking to take our freedoms away. Now, one of the latest tactics that they're using, as you well know, is they claim to want to protect us from misinformation, protect us from that which they claim is not true. And, you know, the idea that we blindly follow along with whatever the government or those in power tell us is true, it goes against the very essence of the Constitution and Bill of Rights. These documents that were created as a resounding rejection of the reign of kings and authorities. But they do so backed by the most lethal force on earth as they appoint themselves as the sole authority and voice of truth, of what is information. So they decide what is true and false. They decide what is misinformation and what is information. And those who don't toe the line are accused of spreading misinformation and being targeted and smeared. I know this might surprise you, but I have a little experience with this. I think your next speaker does too, a bit. But it's crazy because rather than actually engaging in debate, in discussion, or even entertaining, answering sincere questions based on substance, they immediately resort to smears and name-calling. I've been called all of these names. You've probably heard them before: Russian asset, white supremacist, sexist, bigot, racist, extremist, traitor. The list goes on and on. But when we look at the reality we face, even more dangerous than getting canceled is how they weaponize the government against the people. Biden's Department of Homeland Security declared that we are facing a heightened domestic terror threat in this country based on 3 factors. The first of which is, quote, the proliferation of false or misleading narratives, which sow discord or undermine public trust in U.S. government institutions. The number one threat. They're the ones who get to decide what are false or misleading narratives, and therefore they get to decide who is targeted because of it. Biden's Attorney General charged his domestic terrorist unit with going after people who hold anti-authority views, including parents. Parents who dare to stand up to their boards of education and to their schools because they care about their children's education. And we think about the impact of this from a practical standpoint. How do we, the people, vote to choose a president? We don't even have the freedom of engaging in a marketplace of ideas, of sharing our opinion, listening to other perspectives, assessing the information that we've gathered and making our own informed decision about who deserves the honor and responsibility of serving as commander-in-chief. We can't. We can't do this as long as we live in a society where we are surrounded by intimidation and fear of being targeted, being canceled, or having to self-censor so we don't lose our jobs and our ability to provide for our families. What's even worse is they claim to be doing it for us. We want to protect you from this misinformation. The way I read that is they're saying that we are too stupid to think for ourselves. We are too stupid and unable to make decisions for ourselves, so we've just got to trust them to do that for us. That they know better what is good for us and our families and our communities than we do for ourselves. But through all of this, what do we see? Fear. They're afraid. What are they afraid of? They're afraid of us. They're afraid of a free people, a free society. Thomas Jefferson talked about them when he said, quote, "They prefer the calm of despotism to the boisterous sea of liberty." They're afraid of the freedom that each of us has to seek the truth, to speak freely, to question and challenge their decisions and their authority. Why? Because they're afraid of losing power. So they take advantage of crises and emergencies, times of war, whether it's a Cold War or a hot war, to empower the security state, infringe on our liberties and rights, things that we saw with the Patriot Act, we saw it with COVID, we're seeing it now. And we know that once our rights are taken away, that they are not easily or willingly given back. And this picture that is being painted, this reality that we're living in, is not one of a free society or a democracy. This is authoritarianism. And therein lies the hypocrisy of the neocon, neolib foreign policy establishment. Those who are misusing our military by sending them out to be the policemen of the world, overthrowing dictators in other countries that we don't like, but turning a blind eye to the ones that we do. Risking the safety and security and future of the American people by pushing us closer and closer to the brink of a nuclear war, all in the name of spreading democracy and defeating autocracy, and while simultaneously undermining our democracy right here at home. Now, if our leaders actually took their oath of office seriously and truly cared about our Constitution, our security, and our freedom, here's 3 things that they would start with. They'd shut down the secret FISA courts and stop the NSA, FBI, CIA from illegally spying on Americans. They'd denounce the Attorney General for his disgraceful attacks on parents who care for their children's education and future. And they would haul James Clapper before a judge to answer for lying to Congress about how the government was spying on the American people and collecting our information. This would be upholding their oath. But they aren't doing it. And they're not going to do it. So it's up to us. The challenge is great. Unfortunately, so many Americans in this country don't even know what the Bill of Rights is. They think, hey, you know what? If you say something that I don't like, words are violent, so you must be silenced. You must be censored. I must be protected from you. I served for 8 years in Congress and came from there not too long ago and saw firsthand how too many Democrats and Republicans will talk a good game about freedom and civil liberties and claim to stand up for us and our rights, but really when it came time to vote, to protect our civil liberties and privacy, they chose to stand with the power elite and against liberty. If we stand on the sidelines during this time of crisis, we will lose the country we love. That is what is at stake. But here's where we find hope, that in the midst of all of this divisiveness, this chaos, this insanity, just when you think it can't get any worse, it does the very next day. In the midst of all of this, we find hope, we find light, and we find peace in God's unconditional love. We find from Him the strength and the courage to be bold, to stand together, to lift up our voices, and to hold our leaders accountable, to force those leaders in Washington to keep their oath, to uphold the Constitution, to take action to protect our civil liberties and freedoms. Because if they do not, they don't deserve the honor of holding that office. And we need to fire them. Now, it is God who has given us free will, the freedom to choose. And so if we choose to act in this time, our way forward will be lit by the fire of freedom that burns brightly in the hearts of every American, in every community, every home, every church, every classroom across this country, where we have decided that we belong to God and no one else. It is by God's grace that we are free and that we will fight to remain free. Thank you so much. God bless you, and may God bless America. Aloha. Thank you. Thank you.